Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Felix New Show, episode 3. And the topic for today is boundaries. Everybody needs boundaries to live a healthy life, to live a happy life, in order to ensure their well-being is, the way that it should be. So how do you set boundaries? How do you enforce them? And how do you keep at them? So I'm going to go by an article by Psych Central, which is called 10 Ways to Build and Preserve Better Boundaries. I'm going to use this as a kind of a guiding principle of exploring boundaries a little bit more, because I feel that it gives a really nice structure to, understanding how to identify boundaries and also how to implement them and how to enforce them into your own life. So another thing to say here is that, as we grow up, we're never really explained what boundaries are, how we can implement them. It's kind of we might catch something about them every now and then. People say, oh, don't let them do that to you, or stand up for yourself. That's as far as boundaries kind of go. We're not really taught about how do we identify what our boundaries are. We're not really taught about what are the best ways to implement boundaries, or when should we have boundaries? Should we, what right do you have to boundaries? All these questions. So the definition this article on Psych Central gives of a healthy boundary is knowing and understanding what your limits are. So we're going to explore boundaries much further in this episode of the Felix New Show. And, we're also going to touch on self-care. So I'm very honored to have a guest on the show this episode. It's Manisha from the US. She's originally from India, but she's going to tell you more about herself, I'm sure. She works with victims of violence, so she's got a lot of experience of self-care. In such an intense environment, you need to really be able to develop this sense of drawing boundaries and also caring for yourself with people who have such intense stories that could really, wear on you and really bring you down if you don't look after yourself and you don't set boundaries when they need to be set. So I don't know what she's going to talk about now in this episode, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say on this topic. So another little disclaimer to say before we get started is that, of course, this is not medical advice in any way. So, seek help from a professional if you need it. This is more for, raising awareness of certain concepts such as boundaries or, friends in someone's life, like episode 2. You can find that as well, that we've just done. But apart from that, let's get straight in there. So as point 1, they have name your limits, which means you need to identify what your limits are in terms of emotionally, mentally, and physically. So you need to try to identify when is it too much for me physically, when can I not go anymore? And note this down for yourself so you're aware of, when certain levels seems to be reached where you say this is a limit for me, because if you're always in the dark and you don't know, you're not aware of these limits and you don't put them out there, it's always, they're not going to be enforced, of course. Same thing goes mentally, emotionally, spiritually as well. So, identify your limits and say, this is where my limits are. This kind of goes under the umbrella of identifying. Then you should, to further identify your limits, you should, whenever you're in a situation where you feel discomfort or resentment, you should see these as red flags and ask yourself, why am I feeling discomfort? Why am I feeling resentment against a certain person or situation? And when you look at this, if you look at what is causing this, you then get a better sense of what might your limits be. So if someone keeps disrespecting a certain topic that you feel strongly about, or you feel that people shouldn't, have a say on a certain topic, and it's just too much for you, if they do, then see that as your boundary. See, for me, it's a boundary for people to speak on how many hours I should work This is something I like to set for myself. I feel quite uncomfortable if people keep telling me I work too much or I work too little. It's just an example. So yes, that's absolutely that. So tuning into your feelings. So point one, naming your limits. Second, tuning into your feelings to get a better sense of what these limits may be. Now we'll move on to the umbrella term of implementing boundaries. So how do you do that? This is going to depend hugely on person to person, from situation to situation. So with a lot of people, you might communicate in a similar fashion and you'll be able to quite, easily communicate your boundaries that each of you have, and it doesn't cause too much, troubles. In other cases, when someone might be quite different to you or might not understand where your boundaries might be, in those cases, you have to be very direct and say, look, this is too much for me. Please, no more. Or look, you've stepped over a boundary in this case. I'm going to directly tell you that this is too much for me. So be clear, be concrete of where your boundary is. The fourth point is give yourself permission. Sometimes fear, guilt, and self-doubt can stop us from drawing up our boundaries. Fear because we fear the response of other people, how they might react when we say, oh, I need to get to sleep, I can't stay any longer and have drinks with you because I need to get to sleep because I have something tomorrow. Maybe they say, wow, you're not a good friend, This can be in any situation. So you might, or it could be something more intense than that. So you might fear the other person's response, so then that leads you to not drawing your boundary. You might feel guilty. You might feel guilty for saying no to a friend, saying no to a family member. And that might make you think that you're not a good friend or a good family member. You're not a good parent if you say no to your child, if you draw your boundary. That's what you might think. Then you might think that you don't deserve boundaries. You might think you have to just keep going on. You don't have the right to be weak as such and draw this boundary. You just have to keep going. And all of this is, of course, not true. You should give yourself permission to draw boundaries because at the end of the day, it's a way for you to live a healthy life. And drawing boundaries is a way of showing respect to yourself, showing that you respect yourself, that you value yourself. That is what it is. Then the fifth point is self-awareness and awareness of situations. If you're not sticking to the boundaries that you'd like to stick to, why is that? Why can I not stick to these boundaries? What is it in my situation, my surroundings, that is stopping me from not being able to implement this boundary that I'd like to set in? And then what can you do to change the situation and implement the boundary? So be self-aware. Why is it that I can't implement this boundary? And be aware of the situation. Again, why is it that I might not be able to implement this boundary? So it leads us to the sixth point, which says consider your situation in context, which is very similar to the point we just had, but just your role might sometimes be an obstacle to setting a boundary. For example, if you're a caregiver, you might focus on others and you might put yourself right at the back of the queue in terms of who gets to set boundaries, who gets to be cared for. You might ignore your own needs, and this might have become really normal for you even, right? Ask yourself, how does your role maybe affect your ability to implement roles? How do the relationships you have affect the ability to not implement roles, to implement boundaries? Yes, so also ask yourself, how about the relationships in your life? How might they impact on your ability to set boundaries? If someone's always really controlling, that might be stopping you from being able to set these boundaries that you want to set. And then maybe you have to work on getting away from that specific person more. Then what about your work environment? If everybody around you is killing themselves at work, it can be very difficult for you to draw a boundary of saying, look, I'm exhausted. I want to live healthy. I want to live a healthy life. And this is too much for me. But if everyone around you is completely killing themselves and working, 12-hour days and more, then it can be very difficult to set your boundaries. So it's about being aware of this context as well and to then be able to best set your boundaries. So also moving on to self-care a little bit more, you should make self-care a priority. There's often the idea that taking care of yourself is selfish. And I think that's a really dangerous assumption to have. Because firstly, in order to live healthy, you need to take care of yourself. And it's far from selfish to do that, because everyone, in my opinion, has the right to practice self-care and even the need to do so. You know, it is absolutely your right to enforce the boundaries that you have. You're not being, a prince and saying, oh, but it's my boundary to have grapes fed to me on a silver pallet every night. Those are not the kind of boundaries you will be setting. Hopefully, you're setting boundaries that are essential to you, to your health, to your mental well-being, and you should have the human right to set these boundaries, in my opinion. And also, when you're in a better place yourself, then you can help other people much more. So actually, you're not being selfish, you're actually helping, you're actually doing it for them as well, to take care of yourself. That's just something to ponder on, something to think about, of course. Then the 8th point they have here on this psych article of the 10 ways to set better boundaries is to seek support. Seek support from, like you're listening to this podcast here right now. Seek support from professional services that can help you, like coaches, like counselors, who can help you with setting better boundaries, because this can be hugely beneficial. These people are professionals. They really know how to help you to set really strong and good boundaries. Look into books. There are a lot of great books out there on setting boundaries, and there will be some in the description, so you can check those out, of course. Then the 9th point that they have here is to be assertive. So it's not just enough to set boundaries, because what are you going to do with boundaries that are, what's the point of just setting boundaries if you're not also implementing these boundaries? And we often expect people to know what troubles us, but people can't read your mind. When they've crossed a line, when they've stepped over your boundary, you might expect them to know that straight away. But in, 90% of cases, people are not going to know. So that's why it needs you to be assertive, to say, look, for me, this is too much. This is my boundary, no more. And no, you don't have to be confrontational either. Just be assertive and say, no, we can't do it like this. Or, no, this is too much for me. Let's do it like this. It's not about fighting. It's about finding the best solution for everyone that makes everyone feel happy and healthy. And then the last point they give here is to start small. Don't start with a giant mountain straight away. Start with a little pebble and then work your way up. So that means that start with something small that's kind of non-threatening to you. A non-threatening boundary that you feel could be not too difficult for you to implement. And then keep building momentum and keep going. So when something is in motion, it's always, it keeps going. It's much easier to keep going once things are rolling than from starting from zero. Setting boundaries takes courage, practice, support, and it's a skill that you need to master. So this is what they've written here as well as a quote to finish off this article. And that is so, so true. I mean, it's a skill you need to learn. You're not going to be a genius at setting boundaries straight away. I mean, maybe you are, but most of us won't be. So it's a skill you develop, and it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of seeing what works, what doesn't work. It takes a lot of difficult situations at times that you then learn from. And that is how it works, really. This is a very, very important topic, I feel, to talk about. I would kind of like to share 2 stories from my own life where I feel that I've used boundaries just to illustrate this better. So one of them would be when I worked as a peer supporter at my university, and I was supporting a student This could be anything, could be lifestyle related, study related problems, and we would just talk through things. And yeah, so this is kind of, it's confidential, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's more about the basic principle. So this student was very, very emotional. He would sometimes get a bit teary, and it would be quite intense conversations because he had so many troubles in his life. And I did it, maybe 2 sessions or so, and then I felt really drained after that. And I said, I said to myself, this is too much. I can't be doing this. So then I had to draw my boundary, and I actually found a compromise. So I said, look, are you okay if I bring another peer supporter to the session, so we can then, kind of take some of the pressure off me as such? I didn't tell him that, but I said, are you okay of bringing another supporter to the session? And he said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Let's do it. And it all went great. But the idea behind this was so I could take some pressure off me. So it wasn't so intense for an hour. It was, I could say something and then the other supporter could take over. And instead of just exposing myself to another session and getting more and more drained, I decided to draw this boundary and say this is too much. So I have another similar story of when I worked at a mental health community center, and there was a person with schizophrenia, and we got on very well, and they kept telling me their stories, and of course not all of this was real, and they kept telling me about certain things, and it kept going, and it was quite mentally challenging at times. It was heavy things they were talking about, and it was always the same. And there had to be a time where I wouldn't exclude them, but I would say, we would have a conversation, and then I would say, look, I need to also speak to other people, instead of just taking the whole day, because if it was for them, they would have liked to spend the whole day with me, but I had to draw a boundary there, and I had to say to myself, this is too mentally draining for you, Felix. You need to move on to other people. Because there was enough workers there to, I guess, support everyone else, but it was for me. And then I said, look, I have to also speak to the other people. So that's a way of me being assertive, as point number 9 had said, because I had already become self-aware of this. And there was also some time before where I felt I wasn't implementing this, and that's because I felt that maybe they will not, respect me, or think I'm trying to get away from them. That was kind of my thinking at first, but then I was like, no, I'm here for everyone, so they should be able to understand that as well. That's perfectly reasonable. So it's also kind of a dialogue with yourself sometimes to establish these boundaries and find the best way to implement them. So yeah, that's everything I have to say. My personal story is there as well for you. So we'll now move on to Manisha. Please correct me if your name is pronounced differently. And I really hope this was insightful. I very much look forward to what you have to say. All right.
Hi, everyone. Hope you are having a wonderful day. Felix, thank you so much for this opportunity to collaborate with you on this podcast. I really do appreciate it. This is really exciting. A little bit about me. My name is Manisha. I work as an advocate with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I'm also actively engaged in political, environmental, and human rights activism. So today I will be talking a little bit about self-care, what it is, how to engage in self-care, and why it is important. Towards the end of the podcast, I will also share some of my experiences from my own self-care journey. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that the following information is not therapy. If you're looking for professional help, please contact a licensed therapist or a counselor in your area. So a few questions for everyone. Do you ever find yourself feeling overwhelmed, like you are always on the go, flitting from one task to the next, feel drained, exhausted, or not motivated, or maybe a little burnt out? If you answered yes to any of these questions, maybe it's time for you to take a break and take care of yourself. Like Felix rightly said earlier, self care is definitely not selfish. I love this quote from Audre Lorde, the civil rights activist and feminist, who said, "Caring for myself is not self indulgence, it's self preservation." So, self care is definitely a way to take your power back. I think that's really powerful stuff, right? So, what exactly is self care? According to this website, Psych Central, self care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our emotional, physical, or mental health. Self care is really important, right? But why is it so? Because engaging in self care is important to help reduce anxiety, improve our mood, reduce stress. It helps us enhance our relationships with others as well as ourselves. At work, it helps us refocus, come back re energized so that we can complete our tasks. It also helps us focus on ourselves, really recognizing what we need and eventually learning to accept ourselves. So now we're going to do a little activity to engage in self-care by using our five senses. Five senses are sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. So sometimes you might find yourself triggered by a certain situation, or you might be stressed out after an interaction with someone. So, a way to come back to a calmer sense of awareness is to engage in one of our five senses. The goal of the activity is to not engage with all five of our senses, but to choose one that is most meaningful for us at the moment. So, let's start with sight. Let's look around us. What do you notice in the environment? For example, if you're out in nature, you may notice a tree. What do you notice about the tree? Do you notice how the branches bend? How the leaves are fluttering in the breeze? What kind of flowers does the tree have? If you are in a room, maybe you'd want to scan the room and see or find something that might be pleasing to you. For example, if it's a painting, you might want to notice what about that painting is so captivating for you. Is it the colors that the artist has used, the shapes, the designs, or something else? The second one is sound. You could always play a song that is soothing for you. You could play it on repeat and listen to it multiple times. The last few days, the song that has been most soothing for me has definitely been Jackson County Lions' "I Shall Be Released." You could also listen to the sounds of nature, whether it's birds, or waterfalls, or waves. You could listen to something uplifting. Touch. Feeling something like a smooth rock or a textured shell can definitely, help you in being more grounded as well as calm. I definitely used a shell or a rock sometimes when I've had to do intakes with victims of domestic violence because sometimes their stories are so difficult. And holding on to a shell has helped me be calm and be in the moment, be present, so that I could ask these difficult questions and really listen to what the client was saying at that time. Smell. You could light a scented candle, or you could smell fresh flowers. Taste. You could drink something warm, or you could really taste the flavor of each ingredient in the next meal that you have. So these are some examples of ways you can engage your senses so that you can take care of yourself. So the following is a list of self-care tips and techniques. It's by no means a comprehensive list. This is something that I came up by looking at a couple of websites, Psychology Today and Mighty.com. You can definitely pick and choose what might be useful for you and definitely explore other options as well. So some of the physical ways in which we can take care of ourselves are by taking a walk or getting some exercise, eating well, cooking a nutritious meal for ourselves, taking a nap when we need to. We could also take care of ourselves by engaging in emotional self-care, and that could include allowing yourself to cry when you really need to, learning to accept your feelings and not judging them, practicing self-compassion, journaling, getting therapy. This might be the hardest thing to do. Spiritual. Sometimes it might be important for us to connect with our belief system and our values. This could include meditating or praying, attending a service at our place of worship, reading inspiring poetry, or listening to uplifting podcasts like Felix's material over here. He did not pay me to say this, I promise. Spending time in nature. Social. Sometimes we need to connect with people. We are social beings. So connecting with a trusted friend, meeting a relative, asking for help, attending a support group, or connecting with other like-minded people. So all of these are some ways in which we can take care of ourselves. So I also wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what I am doing to engage in self-care. Felix talked a lot about boundaries, right? And this is something that I've had an interesting relationship with. setting boundaries. Some days they've been easy to set, and some days they've been really difficult. For a long time, I really struggled with setting boundaries and then not knowing what to do when, people were violating my boundaries. I think supervision has really helped with this, like, really helped me understand how to set boundaries, how to keep people away from crossing these boundaries. And also, I think learning to be kind to myself when boundaries have been crossed. So, this is something that I'm definitely working on. That being said, other things that I do enjoy for self care include working on mandalas. They're very, very, intrinsic kind of patterns. Sometimes they have a lot of repetition. It's what I call chaos and symmetry. But it's been really helpful because I feel that they help me reinforce some of these boundaries, because you have to color within the lines. And it also, you have to spend some time to contemplate what you are doing. So mandalas have also been used by me when I'm working with my clients, many of whom are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. Clients take them home and they use them as self-care for themselves as well. Or when they are in meetings with me and we're discussing important things, this serves as a little self-care along the way. As an organization, we're trying to use self-care in our daily practices, whether we hang out as co-workers, to talk about different things that may not be work related, maybe go on a walk. Some days we also engage in drawing or coloring or art or playing some games, because the work that we do is intense. The impact that it has on us is also pretty intense. So it's important that we take the time, to just relax and, definitely take care of ourselves. So apart from that, this year, I'm trying to go back to writing. I have a poetry book that has a number of prompts. So definitely working on poetry resolutions for 2018. I think another thing that I really enjoy doing is being part of activist meetings or, attending rallies for a cause, because I really like being with like-minded folks. This energizes me, motivates me, and keeps me going in doing the work that needs to be done. So there is really no specific formula for self-care, no list or no technique. Find something that is meaningful for you. Remember to be kind to yourself. Every day is different. Take it one day at a time. I like this little quote. You gotta nourish to flourish. So what are you going to do today to nourish your body, mind, and spirit? Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Manisha. And thank you everyone who's listened throughout this whole episode. And I hope you've managed to gain some valuable insights from it. So I really loved what you talked about, Manisha, the different techniques that we can do. And it really showed how much we can do, how many different things are out there for us to do. And it's up to us to explore what works well for us. Especially I like the part of our five senses, especially how you talked about having, a rock or a shell, just something to ground you in the moment. I thought that was really powerful and I really liked that. But yeah, thank you very much for all of the different things you brought to the table here. I think that was really nice and beneficial for this episode as well. So to tie in what you're saying as well is that at the end of the day, there's no formula for self-care. There's somewhat of a formula for boundaries. How to identify them, how to implement them, although it's going to be, somewhat different. It's not going to be the same for everyone. But in terms of self-care, it's really what works for you. You can't apply what works for one person to the next person because everyone is so different in that sense. Important to note as well is that, if you need help from a professional, do seek it, because they can be hugely beneficial and there should be no shame in doing so, because at the end of the day, they can help you get to somewhere where you need to be or want to be. And I think that's absolutely, respectable. So just to wrap up the show, I just wanted to quickly kind of summarize boundaries again, just the points that we covered. So in terms of identifying, you have name your limits. That would be emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, whatever you feel your limits are, identify them. Tune into your feelings to be able to identify them. Notice when you feel off and then maybe see, okay, this is something that makes me feel negative and this is a boundary for me. Then in terms of implementing this, sometimes you have to be direct. You You have to give yourself permission. You should never feel guilty for implementing a boundary that you feel you need. You should also become aware of the situation. What are the obstacles that are in the way that are stopping you from implementing your boundaries potentially? And being aware of your situation as well. Consider the context. Are you a caregiver? Does that mean you naturally put yourself last? And then once you're aware of this, you can then start to step out of it. Make self-care a priority as well. It's absolutely not selfish to care for yourself. It's actually the opposite, because when you care for yourself, you'll be able to care for other people much better. As we already covered just now, seek support if you need it. There's a lot of good information and people out there that can help you. 9th point, be assertive. Be assertive. Nothing more needs to be said about that. And last point, start small and do something that's somewhat comfortable for you. And then as you grow, you build momentum, and then you can get better and better. It's a skill. Boundaries are a skill that we learn over a lifetime, and it's a skill you're going to get better and better at. And the same with self-care. So just to end this, I would like to ask you, if you want to find out more on this kind of content, do subscribe to the channel. Do follow the social media, Instagram, that would be at the Felix New. On Facebook as well, the Felix New. Otherwise, you can find the episode for free on SoundCloud, and you can follow on Instagram. You can follow Manisha as well, which is Manisha0426, I believe. But I'm going to put all the links into the description, so don't you worry about that. You're going to be able to find everything that you need to know. So thank you very much for listening. Hope it's been insightful. Do put any kind of comments that you have on the topic or future topics that you would like to see into the comments, and looking forward to hear from you next time.